Hello, and welcome to Barton Peveril's English Literature Department's lecture on Citizen by Claudia Rankine. And you could have been directed to this clip for any number of reasons. And that could be part of an English extension program at Barton Peveril College, which I'll talk to you about at the end of the presentation. Or maybe you're thinking about this for unseen texts on the component 3 of the English Literature A-level, where you, of course, could be asked to analyse poetry. And you could get an extract of a longer poem like this to talk about stylistic features and how meaning is shaped. All of the assessment side of things we'll leave to a little bit later on, but I thought it's a really good idea to look at this text now in the light of everything that's happening with Black Lives Matters in the UK and in the USA at the moment, and how Claudia Rankine's poetry from 2014 articulated so many of the issues of identity, history, colonialism, in a very accessible way. So it's an amazing collection of poems. There are a series of vignettes, autobiographically written, presumably by Rankine's own experiences of being a black woman in America. Some of them are very low-level racism, not to defend any of the suffering and prejudice that she suffers, and some of them are more systemic institutional problems. But I think it's really quite eye-opening for students, particularly at this time and in Hampshire, to have a variety of cultural experiences from texts from other cultures and traditions. And we certainly see that some of the conversations and some of the racial stereotyping really explain to me how it's a two-tier society in America still, and sometimes ignorant, naive, misguided comments are actually indefensible. Okay, so I'm just going to play you part 3 of this, and I've got the audio so that you can hear it being read, because sometimes literature is about exposing you to different things and different voices as well, and you don't need me mansplaining and reading it all to you. Okay, so I'm just going to go to the handout here, and we're on the first page here, and it's quite nice just to have this read out. Okay, so it's not the start of the poem, but as you're hearing this, I'd like you to jot down quotations which you think are significant, either because they're interesting in terms of poetry and use of language and form, or actually go, oh, that's a very interesting portrayal of whatever the poet is trying to get across. In this respect, raising awareness of racial discrimination in the United States. Okay.
3. You are rushing to meet a friend in a distant neighborhood of Santa Monica. This friend says, as you walk toward her, "You are late, you nappy-headed hoe." "What did you say?" you ask, though you have heard every word. This person has never before referred to you like this in your presence, never before code-switched in this manner. "What did you say?" She doesn't, perhaps physically cannot, repeat what she has just said. Maybe the content of her statement is irrelevant, and she only means to signal the stereotype of black people time by employing what she perceives to be black people language. Maybe she is jealous of whoever kept you and wants to suggest you are nothing or everything to her. Maybe she wants to have a belated conversation about Don Imus and the women's basketball team he insulted with his language. You don't know. You don't know what she means. You don't know what response she expects from you, nor do you care. For all your previous understandings, suddenly incoherence feels violent. You both experience this cut, which she keeps insisting is a joke stuck in her throat. And like any other injury, you watch it rupture along its suddenly exposed suture. When a woman you work with calls you by the name of another woman you work with, it is too much of a cliché not to laugh out loud with the friend beside you who says, "Oh, no, she didn't." Still, in the end, so what? Who cares? She had a 50-50 chance of getting it right. Yes, and in your mail, the apology note appears, referring to our mistake. Apparently, your own invisibility is the real problem causing her confusion. This is how the apparatus she propels you into begins to multiply its meaning. What did you say? At the end of a brief phone conversation, you tell the manager you are speaking with that you will come by his office to sign the form. When you arrive and announce yourself, he blurts out, "I didn't know you were black." "I didn't mean to say that," he then says. Aloud, you say, "What?" he asks. "You didn't mean to say that aloud." Your transaction goes swiftly after that. And when the woman with the multiple degrees says, "I didn't know black women could get cancer," instinctively you take 2 steps back, though all urgency leaves the possibility of any kind of relationship, as you realize nowhere is where you will get from here. A friend tells you he has seen a photograph of you on the internet, and he wants to know why you look so angry. You and the photographer chose the photograph he refers to because you both decided it looked the most relaxed. Do you look angry? You wouldn't have said so. Obviously, this unsmiling image of you makes him uncomfortable, and he needs you to account for that. If you were smiling, what would that tell him about your composure in his imagination? Despite the fact that you have the same sabbatical schedule as everyone else, he says you are always on sabbatical. You are friends, so you respond, "Easy." What do you mean? Exactly. What do you mean? Someone in the audience asks the man promoting his new book on humor what makes something funny. His answer is what you expect. Context. After a pause, he adds that if someone said something, like about someone, and you were with your friends, you would probably laugh. But if they said it out in public where black people could hear what was said, you might not, probably would not. Only then do you realize you are among the others out in public, and not among friends. Not long ago, you are in a room where someone asks the philosopher Judith Butler what makes language hurtful. You can feel everyone lean in. Our very being exposes us to the address of another, she answers. We suffer from the condition of being addressable. Our emotional openness, she adds, is carried by our addressability. Language navigates this. For so long you thought the ambition of racist language was to denigrate and erase you as a person. After considering Butler's remarks, you begin to understand yourself as rendered hypervisible in the face of such language acts. Language that feels hurtful is intended to exploit all the ways that you are present. Your alertness, your openness, and your desire to engage actually demand your presence, your looking up, your talking back, and, as insane as it is, saying please. Standing outside the conference room, unseen by the 2 men waiting for the others to arrive, you hear one say to the other that being around black people is like watching a foreign film without translation. Because you will spend the next 2 hours around the round table that makes conversing easier, you consider waiting a few minutes before entering the room. The real estate woman, who didn't fathom she could have made an appointment to show her house to you, spends much of the walkthrough telling your friend, repeatedly, how comfortable she feels around her. Neither you nor your friend bothers to ask who is making her feel uncomfortable. The man at the cash register wants to know if you think your card will work. If this is his routine, he didn't use it on the friend who went before you. As she picks up her bag, she looks to see what you will say. She says nothing. You want her to say something, both as witness and as a friend. She is not you. Her silence says so. Because you are watching all this take place even as you participate in it, you say nothing as well. Come over here with me, your eyes say. Why on earth would she? The man behind the register returns your card and places the sandwich and Pellegrino in a bag, which you take from the counter. What is wrong with you? This question gets stuck in your dreams. Another friend tells you you have to learn not to absorb the world. She says sometimes she can hear her own voice saying silently to whomever, "You are saying this thing, and I am not going to accept it." Your friend refuses to carry what doesn't belong to her. You take in things you don't want all the time. The second you hear or see some ordinary moment, all its intended targets, all the meanings behind the retreating seconds, as far as you are able to see, come into focus. Hold up. Did you just hear? Did you just say? Did you just see? Did you just do that? Then the voice in your head silently tells you to take your foot off your throat, because just getting along shouldn't be an ambition.
I think that phrase at the end there really sums up this whole collection and kind of really encapsulates where we are with race relations at the moment. You know, that last line, then the voice in your head silently tells you to take your foot off your throat because just getting along shouldn't be an ambition. And I think what we're starting to see now is all types of people realizing that simply getting along and tolerating the status quo with race relations is not acceptable, and we want true equality and an actual radical change. So that's it's nice to have poetry with such an unambiguous and clear didactic message, which is really good. There is an article in the handout attached from the Guardian, which is work by Adam Fitzgerald, which is worth looking at. But what I would like you to think about is some of these questions that I'm just about to put up, and they will be shared with you as a separate thing without my face all over the top of it as well. So let's have a little look at these, and I think they should guide you through exactly what I'm hoping you to do here. Okay, so number one, describe the effect of using a second person address. Why is using the pronoun you so significant? Something to think about is that that was a professional recording, and the lady reading it out is a lady called Alison Johnson, who is a professional narrator, and she narrates it very well. But she's white. Okay. Now, part of me goes, "Oh, why didn't they employ a black actress or a black narrator to say this when we're talking about raising voices?" But actually, I think that contributes very nicely to the second person impact. So that's something to think about. Okay. Number two, which quotations use medical language? How might readers respond to these images? It's lots of things from the semantic field of sort of anatomy and medicine, surgery, things like that. Why do we have those? I'd like you to explore that. Number three, what is the cliche on page 43? Think about some of the horrendous gender, racial stereotyping about African Americans. You hopefully you'll be able to work out what that cliche is. If you can't, then maybe that's a good thing that you don't realize just how bad things were and are. What is what is also significant about the 50-50 chance? I think that's good. Number four, find examples of where Rankine leaves deliberate gaps in situations where readers need to imagine what happened. Sometimes in between lines of the poem, you get there's something missing, and then we've moved on, sometimes 10 seconds, sometimes 10 minutes, sometimes a week later, and what's happened in between. Okay, I think she's very clever at doing that. Okay, the use of italics on page 47 is good, and that was enunciated very well on the audio, so some comments on that would be good. 6, find and analyze quotations where the protagonist feels hyper visible because of her skin color. That word hyper visible is used. I don't just mean that quotation. I mean, where do we get a sense that she's very self-consciously aware of her skin color and her ethnicity? A lot of the time in writing about African Americans, we had novels like The Invisible Man, which suggested that black people are invisible and nobody sees them, and they might as well not be there because they don't have equality. On the contrary, in America now, and indeed in 2014 when Rankine is writing, perhaps the suggestion is that they're hyper visible, that they're always seen, and this causes a problem in terms of stop and search and things like that. It clearly has a sociological impact here. Number 7, being around black people is like watching a foreign film without translation. What poetic device is used here, and what might be the point of Rankine's comparison? I'd like you to look at that and really think about what observing people from a different culture converse, or even a different subsect of society, even if it's just a gang, can be very isolating. But what's the point that she's making there? Okay, let me move my head away up here so we can do the rest of the questions. Slightly better angle on the double chin up there. So let's have a little look at 8. Explain the prejudice and racial stereotyping on page 54 and 55. Why is our protagonist ultimately left feeling frustrated? I kind of touched on that with my favourite quote at the end there. We get a sense that what is the frustration? The frustration is obviously with the racism, but it's something more. And if you could articulate that, I think that would be good. And number 9, good bit of terminology. I'd like you to always use the word lyric, which is quite good. The full title of this collection is Citizen, an American Lyric. Now, lyrics traditionally, going all the way back to the ancient Greeks, would express spontaneous, direct feelings, often characterized by a song-like outpouring of the poet's own thoughts and experiences. And it clearly is that. And I think we get a sense that this is not just one woman's experience. Sadly, it's a wider cultural, sociological phenomenon of people suffering these moments. Okay, so which quotations best encapsulate the lyric and sadly autobiographical quality of Rankine's poetry? How do you know it's a lyric? There's some excellent other parts of the poem. I fully recommend the whole book. We do have copies in the college library. It's excellent. I mean, there's a whole series about the tennis player Serena Williams and how statistically she has incorrect calls against her foot faults and service faults in the game of tennis. And the only explanation is for that is because people can't perhaps accept that someone can be black and female and that good at tennis. So they often seem to unnecessarily call her out on her tennis. Now, that's an incredible thing to write poems about. But that's obviously not the bit that you've just heard, but that's another bit to look forward to. Now, if you've been watching this as part of English Extension, I think it's really important that if you're applying to the English at university, one of the first things that I look at when someone says, "Can you look at my personal statement?" is how monochromatic is your personal statement? Is it clear that you've read people from different cultural backgrounds, different ethnicities? Do you have an understanding of post-colonialism? And I think any decent admissions tutor would look at your list of writers and go, "They're all white." Okay, how can you communicate that you're an evaluative, empathetic, socially aware person if you're only reading from one ethnicity? So do try to make sure you've got something like that, and not a tokenistic thing, a genuine passion for non-white writers is advisable. Okay. And it could be Claudia Rankine. I mean, the other thing is, of course, this is poetry as well, and so we never see enough poetry in people's personal statements. So again, that's kind of one of the things that we would recommend as part of the English Extension course. If you're doing these questions as part of Component 3, Unseen Poetry, let's make sure that these 9 tasks are beautifully laid out in your shared Google Docs with me, and that you're writing in quite a lot of detail with quotations and terminology, ready to write the inevitable paragraph about this. Good. I think that's just about it. If you want any more spiel about this, I'd love to talk about it at great length to you, but you'll have to email me. Okay, well done. And I should be able to find a way of pausing and stopping this now. But well done.